The EOS Rebel T7i, also known as the 800D, is a completely different camera than the T6i 750D on the inside. But somehow Canon manages to make this big change feel incremental. It delivers roughly the same photo quality as before at the same resolution, and shoots a little bit faster once you discount how fast or slow your lens drives. So it remains a reliable option for people looking for a functional camera capable of handling kids, pets, and vacation snapshots. The most visible change is the updated newbie interface. The shooting display doesn't offer any different options, but it does look more modern and attractive with bright imagery and more explanatory text. The guided menu option simply pops up an interstitial screen telling you what a given submenu does. The feature guide isn't new and gets old really fast. The camera's articulated touchscreen is still a favorite of mine for shooting video, though. It's responsive and has an intelligent user interface, including the usual capabilities like touch focus that streamline live view shooting. The rest of the body's pretty standard for a DSLR. It's got a comfortable grip, but it's big compared to competitors like the Nikon D5600 or smaller mirrorless models. It feels sturdy, if a bit plasticky. There are direct access controls for most functions, something you get when you step up from a bare-bones entry-level model. And it's got a nice set of autofocus options for its class thanks to the upgrade to Canon's dual-pixel CMOS sensor. Nikon's inexpensive D5600 DSLR walks in the footsteps of the D5500, remaining a too small for some but otherwise excellent, inexpensive camera that's a great choice for typical family photography with solid photo quality. The body is unchanged. It's quite straightforward to use and very similar to its cheaper sibling, the D3400, but with some extra buttons and switches. I still don't like Nikon's flat multi-way controller and will complain about it every single time. The small size means it's got a small grip. The pinky on even my medium-sized girl hands is forced to curl underneath the grip slightly. It adds in-camera time-lapse, Bluetooth, and the ability to swipe through the images and playback via the touchscreen. The features are basic but sufficient for its class, with a variety of filter effects, quiet shutter release, which is really nice for school plays and sleeping babies, and the articulated display. It also has nice perks like interval shooting and in-camera 2-shot HDR, which produces decent results, and is faster than a lot of competitors. The camera still annoyingly turns certain settings off after one shot, though, like HDR and the self-timer. The D5600 delivers better performance than its predecessor for single-shot speed, but otherwise unchanged. But that's still best in class. The Nikon D3400 is a fine mix of the sublime and the ridiculous. The sublime, it delivers great photos and performance for a cheap DSLR, well suited to a family photographer or budget traveler. It can sustain a continuous shooting speed of about 5 frames per second. That's fast enough for typical kids and pets types of photos, though that's with just autofocus, no auto exposure. That means photos of someone running in and out of sun and shadow will not expose properly all the time. And the new AFP kit lens with its stepper motor is faster and quieter for shooting video and stills via the LCD and live view than Nikon's standard lenses. It's pretty light on features, but that's not unusual for a cheap DSLR. That means fixed LCD, no manual aperture in video, and overall not a lot of options. Unfortunately, I hate the viewfinder display's tiny autofocus points that don't tell you if the shot's in focus, and that you really can't see. You have to pre-focus just to see the AF points in order to get them on the subject. But the ridiculousness is the wireless. It doesn't have Wi-Fi, just low bandwidth Bluetooth, and it's limited to downloading 2 megapixel JPEGs to your phone. That's lower resolution than the typical selfie. It also geotags them and sets the clock. You can't even use it as a dumb remote shutter because that requires Wi-Fi. And on Android, the app sucks up memory and CPU cycles until you have to manually force it to quit. I had to uninstall it. The replacement for its popular D5200, the Nikon D5300 delivers a slightly redesigned and noticeably smaller and lighter body, the incorporation of a sensor without an optical low-pass filter, bigger and better viewfinder and LCD, and an expanded feature set which now includes Wi-Fi and geotagging built right into the camera. Combined with the new 18 to 140mm lens kit, you get a more expensive but still a great option for the family photographer or enthusiast. The design and interface are fundamentally the same as the D5200. While it's smaller and lighter, it still feels comfortable to use and reasonably well built. The grip's redesigned to increase the clearance between your hand and the lens, and it really does feel more comfortable. The drive mode button had to be relocated to the side in order to make room for the Wi-Fi and GPS antennas, and I actually prefer it there. The LCD and viewfinder are both bigger and a bit nicer. It also has a stereo microphone now. And my only real complaint is about the multi-controller. It feels a little too flat and hard to maneuver precisely. The camera incorporates a new version of Nikon's X-Speed image processor, which allows for the addition of 1080 60p video and better battery life, although the camera does have a new battery. The GPS intermittently failed to tag images, though, even when I hadn't moved. Connecting to mobile devices via Wi-Fi works relatively seamlessly, though the camera doesn't have NFC to smooth the kinks of connecting, and Nikon's app has limited tethered shooting capabilities. You can't change any settings, but you can touch focus. I don't like that the app stays loaded in memory on Android when you disconnect. Its performance remains roughly the same as the D5200, which is pretty good for this class. Live view shooting is still on the slow, disappointing side, but by all other measures, including its 5.1 frame per second JPEG burst, I think most people will be pretty happy with it. If you shoot RAW, it's still insufficient for continuous shooting since it still only has a 6 frame burst buffer. The anti-aliasing filter-free sensor produces great photos, and the extra sharpness it provides, plus the excellent JPEG processing, results in usable images as high as ISO 6400. In a body less than $1,000, that's really, really good. Even shooting in 14-bit RAW doesn't seem to preserve a lot of highlight detail, but the camera tends to underexpose as a rule, and you can recover a lot of shadow detail without introducing a lot of noise. I'm not crazy about the camera's default settings. They include normal image quality rather than fine, which is a higher compression level. Manual adjustments during movie shooting are turned off, and what's a real pain for me, sequential file numbering defaults to off. With the D5300, Nikon remains at the head of the class of sub-1000 DSLRs. I'm Lori Grunin, and this is the Nikon D5300. With somewhat better photo quality and slightly better performance, the D3300 delivers a modest improvement over its predecessor, the D3200. It's enough to bump up its rating and improve its status relative to some competitors, but not so much that it's definitively worth the extra money over the D3200 for buyers on tight budgets. The rest of the updates are minor. They include 1080 60p video, a redesigned beginner's guide mode, and a slightly smaller and lighter body. It keeps the old 11-point autofocus system of its predecessor and still lacks bracketing and built-in Wi-Fi. The new collapsible kit lens that ships with the D3300 seems kind of unnecessary to me. Unlike with mirrorless systems, where the bodies are so much smaller that a collapsible lens makes sense, the body of the D3300 is still relatively large, and the new lens only shaves about half an inch in length and circumference and 2.4 ounces from the weight. It's certainly not worth the extra $50 if you're buying it standalone. And since it will coexist in the market with the traditional 18 to 55 millimeter version, watch out when you're shopping and make sure you're getting the lens that you expect. But I also bet that there will be cheaper versions of the kit available with the old lens. The body itself is almost identical to the D3200, which had barely changed from the D3100 before that, except for a few tweaks. It's got a big, comfortable grip, and Nikon updated and streamlined its beginner-friendly guide mode. There's easy operation, which, like auto, provides access to a limited number of options, as well as an advanced mode, which describes the appropriate settings for the chosen scenario and then allows you to change the settings yourself. The small, dim viewfinder hasn't changed, which is unsurprising since it's typical for entry-level models. I really dislike the tiny focus points which only illuminate, and briefly, when you half-press the shutter to pre-focus. They're kind of hard to see in moderate to dim light, so if you shoot on anything other than full auto, first you have to press the shutter to find the appropriate focus point, in my case center, before you can even begin to frame the scene. Overall, the D3300 tests faster than the D3200 and many of its competitors, but it still feels pretty slow to shoot with, possibly because of the relatively sluggish lens. The camera does deliver an excellent 5.1 frame per second burst with autofocus and with no significant slowing as high as 30 shots. However, the autofocus can't really keep up with the frame rate, so there are a lot of misses. Photos are the camera's strong suit, and video looks pretty good as well. The 3300 improves on the image quality of the 3200, with most images appearing somewhat sharper, as you'd expect from the new anti-aliasing filter-free 24 megapixel sensor. And the camera fares pretty well compared to competitors too. Depending upon scene content, the JPEGs are good up to about ISO 1600, and they're usable through ISO 6400. Colors look quite accurate, and there's a reasonable amount of recoverable highlight and shadow detail in RAW files for its price class. If you're looking for a competent but inexpensive general-purpose first DSLR, the D3300 is a fine choice. I'm Lori Grunin, and this is the Nikon D3300.